is Paul Whitmore, and as a senior minister here, welcome to the Southport Congregational Church, and welcome to this evening. And on behalf of our congregation, it is a privilege to be hosting this evening's vigil marking the 6th year following the Sandy Hook school tragedies. May this truly be a sanctuary for all tonight, as we embrace all those who lost their lives on this day directly and indirectly, as we also embrace the families of those victims whose lives were shattered and transformed forever, and the survivors whose lives were also lost in so many ways, and the emergency responders and the town of Sandy Hook and our nation, and all of us in a multitude of ways. So it is good, and it is loving, and it is healing, and strong, and right that we are together here tonight. We have a very full evening. We have many guests, all of whom I thank for being here. And so may I simply say, as we begin, may our love and our presence include, but not stop, at simply remembering and lifting up and embracing and loving in warmth and spirit, but may we continue to love with our collective strength and compassion and action as we go forward, so that no new vigils like this will ever need to take shape. And now I'd like to invite Reverend Laura Whitmore to lead us in opening prayer.
As people of all faiths of God's people, let's take this moment and join together our hearts and our minds in the spirit of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for this day and for all who are gathered together in this place of sanctuary, this place in which we can spend time together in hope and in peace and in love. We have gathered here, God, as instruments of your peace, to remember lives lost, to heal our souls a little bit more, to hold and support one another, and to reignite our determination to end this violence. We have watched the pain and anguish of people whose lives have been devastated by mass shootings in our towns, in our state, in our country, and in our world. And God, our hearts cry out for those who have lost their lives. And we pray deeply for their loved ones, for their mothers and fathers, their husbands and wives, their sisters and brothers, their children and their friends. And so, God, we ask you to share with all those who are hurting hope for a new beginning, strength for the process of healing, joy in the small blessings of life, and comfort in their times of pain. But that's not enough, God. As instruments of your peace, we need you to strengthen us and to sustain us as we work to end gun violence. Continue to empower each one of us, survivor, supporter, citizen, and government official, to speak out more loudly when those around us are trying to silence us, to stand up stronger to fight when we feel weakened by the apathy around us, and to work harder to protect the innocent when those around us care only of profits. Make us instruments of your peace, God, because the time is now for us to end this insidious trend and to bring about peace on earth and goodwill to all. As instruments of your peace, we will use our pain for power, we will use our loss for strength, and we will use our knowledge for implementing change. So in this moment, fill our hearts with your grace, with your mercy, and with your love, and offer each of us your healing hand of unconditional love and your strength to move mountains. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Pastors Paul and Laura Whitmore, for allowing us to gather here in remembrance and to recommit our resolve to end gun violence. Thank you to the violinists, students Lucy and Alejo, and their teacher Jean. You guys were amazing. It was beautiful. Thank you. My name is Abby Clements, and I was a second grade teacher at Sandy Hook School and survived the tragedy along with some of my friends here today on December 14th, 2012. About 6 months later, I met Kara Bakey and joined the Connecticut Moms Demand Action chapter. I've had several leadership roles, and I am so proud to be the deputy chapter leader. This work I do with these amazing people you're about to meet, so many in the audience today, and my husband Brian and my daughter Sarah, who are here activists in their own right, is the most important work in my life. And though this is a profoundly difficult month, I'm incredibly proud of our resolve and dedication to end gun violence.
Thank you, Abby, for your tireless resolve to end gun violence, for your courage, and for being such an inspiring and eloquent voice in our Connecticut chapter. My name is Kara Nelson Bakey, and I'm the chapter leader of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America here in Connecticut. It was almost 6 years ago when we all heard the news of a shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. I, like so many of you I'm sure, remember exactly where I was and exactly what I was doing when I heard that news. Though not a resident of Newtown, and though I didn't lose anyone close to me that day, as a parent of a then first grader, my son Benjamin, and fourth grader, my daughter Charlotte, at our elementary school in Norwalk, the events of that day rocked me to my core. A few days after the tragedy, after searching Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD, and guns, I came upon Shannon Watts' Facebook page, which was then called 1 Million Moms for Gun Control. A mother of 5, she launched that page from her kitchen table the day after Sandy Hook. Inspired by her, I launched a Fairfield County group of 1 Million Moms, and since then have been committed as an activist in gun violence prevention and a leader within Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense.
Since then, our Connecticut chapter has only grown. Within our state, we are 11,500 active supporters strong, half of those since the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School this past February. Here in Connecticut, we have 13 local groups, soon to be 15, from Greenwich to Niantic, from Litchfield County to the Quiet Corner. We are organized by 90 leaders, women and men, parents and non-parents, all working together to fight for legislation, cultural and corporate change to reduce and to end gun violence.
Tonight, you will hear from survivors of gun violence, people who have experienced and endured the painful consequences of a shooting. You'll hear from a mother and daughter activist pair who inspire and encourage one another. We are grateful and thankful for their presence and for their voices here tonight. We will also hear from local musicians, including some members of the Advanced Vocal Ensemble at Laurelton Hall in Milford, one of whom I'm proud to call my daughter, and also Tim Warren from the American rock band, The Alternate Roots out of Bridgeport, and of course, the amazing student violin duo from Weston and Westport. Thank you again.
We are honored and thankful to have with us tonight several Connecticut legislators, gun sense champions, former gun sense candidates, as well as those newly elected and dedicated to gun violence prevention. Moms Demand Action volunteers worked tirelessly this past election season to help get our gun sense candidates elected, Over 500 of our volunteers participated in phone banking, canvassing, all on behalf of them. That's thousands of numbers dialed and doors knocked. And it worked. In races where we had a gun sense candidate, we won 60% of those races here in Connecticut.
We here in Connecticut are lucky to have such strong gun laws as we do. After Massachusetts and California, we're ranked third in the nation. But there is more to do. And we can and we will do more. And one of the ways we will do that is by amplifying the voices of those who are most directly impacted by gun violence, the survivors of gun violence, and that is what this evening is all about. At this time, I would like to welcome Newtown residents Cindy Carlson and her daughter, Anne-Marie Carlson.
My name is Cindy Carlson, and my family has lived in Sandy Hook for 18 years. I worked at the Sandy Hook School Library for 6 years and was at work there on the morning of Friday, December 14th.
My name is Anne-Marie Carlson. I am 15 and a sophomore at Newtown High School, and I was in 4th grade at Sandy Hook at the time. Since 4th grade, I've become active and interested in fighting for the end to gun violence in this country.
Thank you, Abby and Kara, for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. We're honored to represent our Sandy Hook school community. One way that families make sense of their day and their lives is to talk about highs and lows. Some families call it peaks and pits. Some families call it roses and thorns. The idea is that you share the best and worst of your day with each other. We've talked with each other
about our experience on 1214 and the aftermath for 6 years as a way of coping. We've talked about the lows and we've talked about the highs, and tonight we'll share some with you.
We revisit our lows to remember how far we've come. It's our hope that sharing the lows will make real the experience of people affected by gun violence and motivate you to keep fighting for gun sense. And we hope that the highs remind you of how important it is to lift each other up, to see the good, and to find peace where you can.
One low was walking through our town during Christmas time and seeing news trucks and media there for the sole purpose of video and broadcast and not sympathizing. Seeing all these trucks and media distracted me as a child from the fun and joys of Christmas time and made me focus on the sad news and how it was being shared around the world.
An early vivid experience that made me understand how the lows would be was something I overheard once we evacuated from the library. Our library class was the last to be evacuated to the nearby firehouse, and family and spouses had started to arrive. I overheard the husband of a colleague tell someone that it was worse than Columbine. The phrase stayed in my head for hours and even into my sleep that night. I felt its weight. Worse than Columbine. Worse than Columbine.
And when I meet someone at a public place or on a vacation and they ask me where I'm from or I have to say Sandy Hook, and they say, "Oh, so sorry," or "Oh, is that where it occurred?" You don't want to be known for that, and you don't want to say your town name again. I shouldn't, and my peers shouldn't have to be worried and hesitant to say the own name of their town.
Once we moved to our temporary school at Chalk Hill, one day we had a class of surviving first graders in the library. Someone dropped a metal water bottle in the hall, and one student hid and others started to cry. We realized we had to give listening tours of the library so our students could feel safe. This is what the printer sounds like. This is what the door sounds like when it clicks shut. We even replaced one of our library carts because a rattling wheel called to mind gunshots.
I walked into a friend's house on my way to pick her up to see Frozen when I was little, and the news was on. It was talking about 1214, and it ruined the mood for Frozen. It's just always there. When I research or Google the name of my hometown, pictures of him or pictures of that day appear. This is not what should appear.
I had to read the names of the 26 who died to my 3 children. Many we knew well, but it was even harder to admit there were a few that I didn't have clear memories of.
People think we're actors or that it didn't happen. They use my most hated word, hoax. That makes it worse, knowing that there are those kinds of people in our country.
Soon after, a school administrator, frustrated with some situation, looked at me and she said, unbelievably, "Just shoot me." And yet, at the same time, I've been criticized for what I've said in the aftermath, for library books that weren't cataloged, for library books that were cataloged, for speaking opportunities taken, for Legacy Foundation events missed. When there was complaining at a PTA meeting about how donated goods were being distributed, one mom said, "If you have your kids, shut up." And that's been the crux of many of the lows for me, deciding when to shut up and when to speak up. So many lows, but also moments of grace.
All the snowflakes sent to our temporary school were pretty. I liked them, and it showed that people cared. The snowflakes were a part of my Christmas season that I could look forward to, enjoy, and admire.
Watching Anne-Marie's quest to understand and to be open-hearted to the experience and to meet it all with resilience has been one of the proudest points of my 21 years as a parent. She wasn't afraid to ask questions. Just a few days after 12/14, she visited a friend who lost a brother. She wasn't nervous. All she asked me in advance was, "What do you think they'll do with his room?" In the immediate aftermath, Anne-Marie had the courage to ask me everything from, "Does Mrs. Gunn," that was our art teacher at the time, "Does Mrs. Gunn feel weird because her last name is Gunn?" And "What did it feel like for Mrs. Hawkstrom?"
My teacher at the time knew what to do in order to make the kids feel comfortable and to feel safe in their school environment. She used a positive tone, a soothing tone. She was always there, never absent. She tried to connect with us, and she was caring to the two students in our class who had lost siblings.
I found strength in the women I worked with, especially library colleagues Mary Ann and Yvonne, that we were like-minded in our desire to rebuild our library traditions and our processes at our temporary home at Chalk Hill made a difference in my recovery. We found humor where we could, rolled our eyes when we had to, and took on horrible tasks like finding a way to get the lists of all the library books borrowed by students who had been killed as a remembrance to their grieving parents, and to figure out how to display library books for Martin Luther King Day when they all featured his death by gun violence, and assessing our new closet for its ability to shelter a class.
The rubber ducks that were sent to our school and given out to us once in a while gave us something to look forward to. I could look for them in the hallway, keeping my eye busy as I walked, and whenever I was lucky to find one, it was a highlight of my day. I remember a couple special times when our teacher would put ducks in my locker. Those times were awesome. My favorite ducks were the unicorns, the dogs, and the cats, although they were all wonderful and exciting.
When we went to Katona for Anne-Marie Murphy's funeral, the streets were overflowing with cars and there was nowhere to park. A stranger came out from her house and waved us into her driveway.
When we were hiding in the gym, seeing the strongest people in my grade cry, I learned that I wasn't the only one who felt weak.
The comfort dogs that came to town opened my eyes. I didn't even like dogs before I saw all the dogs that came to town, especially the Goldens who spent time in the library. Those dogs gave us something to focus on and something to distract us. And now we have a dog of our own, and I'm unexpectedly crazy about it.
Teachers, friends, and dogs have lifted us up to close. To close, we'll lift up the names of those we lost at Sandy Hook School.
Anna,
Allie,
Abiel,
Ben,
Caroline,
Catherine,
Charlotte,
Jace,
Daniel,
Dylan,
Emily,
Grace,
Jack,
James,
Jesse,
Jessica,
Joey,
Anne-Marie,
Dawn,
Lauren,
Mary,
Rachel.
and Vicki.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shayna Druckman. I'm a senior at Stanford High School, and this is my mom, Robin Druckman. In biology class, we learned about viruses. Some viruses can infect a cell, but then lay dormant for years before an outside factor triggers a response.
6 years ago, I sat shocked and horrified upon hearing the news of Sandy Hook and the 26 beautiful lives lost inside the school. I had no idea what to do except cry and be angry. A month later, I signed the Sandy Hook Promise and wrote on Facebook, "We can never forget, we must keep the conversation alive and work for change."
I wasn't a Facebook poster back then, so that was a lot for me to share publicly. That same month, I marched in my first ever protest outside of a gun show in Stamford. There were just 12 of us, but we marched in circles, holding up signs for sensible gun laws. I was quoted in the newspaper saying, "This was our opportunity to stand up and speak out and say we're not going to let the NRA get their way." The next month, I attended an educational session about gun violence that the police held at a local temple. I wanted to get involved, but then life and fear got in the way, and my actions went dormant.
6 years ago, I was 11 years old. I remember the shock and the fear from that day, but most of all, I remember noticing the more subtle changes at school. The hallways were a bit quieter, the shades were always drawn, and the doors always locked. I wanted to do something to help, but I also did not want to live in fear, so I pushed it down and forced myself to forget. After Sandy Hook, a virus of sadness and anger was planted within us.
And then this February 14th, Parkland happened. And once again, I sat shocked and horrified. But as I watched the students speak out on the news, kids the same age as my own, something was different. I felt hope and inspiration from these Gen Zs, and if they could speak their truth, then certainly Shayna and I could too. A month later, I attended my first Moms Demand Action meeting in Stamford, thanks to the many moms in this room who have been working tirelessly for years to set up the structure for the rest of us to join. As the meeting wrapped up and my friends left, someone asked for volunteers to help plan events. I sat alone a bit longer, thinking this is finally my chance to get involved for real. I've coordinated plenty of events before, I can do this. Fast forward exactly 2 weeks to the day of that first meeting, and I found myself standing in front of 3,000 people as the logistics lead for the March for Our Lives rally in Stamford. And in that short 2 weeks, I met the most amazing group of first-time activist moms and students who each contributed their own skills and talents to create this powerful event.
February 14th, 6 years later, and it felt like I was having deja vu. It was the same shock, fear, and anger, but this time also a sense of guilt. My mom was right. Emma Gonzalez and Jacqueline Korn were my age. It was time for me to step out of my comfort zone and join the revolution. Helping to organize the March for Our Lives rally made me feel like I had a purpose. For the first time since Sandy Hook, I felt like I had a voice that could truly affect change. Parkland activated the hidden virus within us, and the only cure seemed to be sustained action.
One step forward created a snowball effect of action. The rally led to me becoming the event lead for Moms Demand Action Stamford, engaging more in my community, facilitating student-led activities, and campaigning for gun sense candidates. All first-time actions I had never expected to do, but was encouraged by my daughter, who I'm truly blessed to have by my side.
Coordinating Wear Orange Day led to starting a Students Demand Action chapter at my school. I also learned the importance of electing candidates who would support strong gun laws. So, during the summer, I campaigned for Mac Blumenthal, canvassing and phone banking, which were actions I never thought I'd feel comfortable doing.
Of all the aspects of campaigning, door knocking was the one area that made me most hesitant. But how could I let my little Shay canvass alone? I finally got up the energy to join her. I figured it was good exercise. But I made her do all the talking at first, especially because she was so incredibly fearless and flashed her big smile regardless of the response.
Eventually, after learning from me, my mom took the lead on campaign work when school started in the fall. But she continued to nag me, "Shay, finish your college essay already. We gotta go save democracy." This became our rallying cry and always put things into perspective for me. Calculus or do something that really matters? It was an easy decision.
When I got a terrible case of laryngitis a few days before the election, Shayna immediately took back the lead during the critical get out the vote final canvassing effort that we could not miss. We made a great team, always supporting, teaching, and motivating each other to just keep going, even in the cold, dark rain, and with even more resolve after the tragic news of Pittsburgh.
That was just the beginning of our activist journey. Now we're getting right back to work, advocating for stronger laws with our new elected gun sense officials. I'll be in college next year, but I'm looking forward to continuing this important work with my mom over FaceTime.
We won't let life get in the way again or let this virus set us back. We say yes, and we choose action over fear, anger, and sadness, so that we will never forget. We will keep the conversation alive, and we will make change.
Just like Kara, I remember exactly where I was on December 14, 2012, as information about the unthinkable tragedy at Sandy Hook began to unfold. I'm sure almost everyone in this room does as well, and my heart is always with those of you who were there. Tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happens in the days and the years after a tragic shooting. My name is Tara Gottlieb. My story starts in 2005. I had just graduated college, moved out of my parents' home in Bridgeport into my first New York City apartment. At work one evening, I got a phone call, followed by many more phone calls. They were confusing. Some were frantic, some were vague, but they all said one thing the same. My parents' jewelry store here in Fairfield, Connecticut had been robbed, and I needed to get to Bridgeport Hospital now. As I made my way by car from Times Square to Bridgeport Hospital, what followed was a frenzied chaos. More phone calls, more confusion. I don't think the car had even fully stopped as we pulled into the hospital parking lot when I jumped out and ran to my brother who was standing outside, asking him what in the world was going on. With his head down and in his gentle way, he simply said, "They're dead. Both of them. Mom and Dad are dead." That frenzied chaos came to a screeching halt. My world was silence, and as I tried to catch my breath, in that moment, I felt paralyzed. A drug addict who fueled his habit with petty crimes acquired a gun during the break-in of a home in Greenwich. He then used that gun to rob and murder my parents, Tim and Kim Donovan, as well as another jeweler named Thomas Renison in Long Island. Perhaps it's because they were high school sweethearts. Perhaps it was because this was Fairfield, Connecticut. But my parents' killing received quite a bit of attention in the news. These stories highlighted how kind they were and how senseless this tragedy was. Of course, those are both very true. But the headlines fade there. They don't go on to tell you what happens to those of us left behind, to the survivors and the communities. But I stand here tonight, 13 years later, and I assure you that this still impacts my daily life. At some point of every day, I come to the realization of what has happened and the fact that my parents are gone. It's like experiencing that initial shock on a much smaller scale, but yes, every single day. In the first year that they were gone, I wanted to do something to remember my dad. He was an avid runner, competing in 2 marathons every year. The spring race often changed, but the fall, that was always reserved for New York City. So I ran the marathon myself. And as I got closer to the finish line, I realized he wasn't there. This is an obvious fact that I knew full well as I set out on the journey. And at the same time, as I made my way through Central Park, it was an idea that I couldn't fathom. He really wasn't going to see me finish. I finished that race in tears, because for me, that was the day I finally realized that they were gone. And there's no headline about that feeling. And now as a parent, I mourn them in new ways. Just 2 months ago, I was signing my infant son up for daycare, and as I made my way through the paperwork, I came to a section asking for his maternal grandparents' name and address, as they loved sending cards and surprises in the mail. I froze. I couldn't believe, this many years later, that I would be writing not applicable in that section. But I did, and I moved on. Because like so many other things, I had no choice. And lastly, just this past Thanksgiving, although I never usually let myself do this, just for a moment, I imagined what it would be like if my parents were alive. The sounds of their 3 grandchildren giggling, drowning out my dad's music in the background, and my mom cooking in the kitchen. It was an idea that overwhelmed me so much that I began to tear up. My 3-year-old daughter noticed, and she asked me why I was sad. I assured her that I wasn't sad, that I just missed my own mom a little bit sometimes. So she told me not to feel sad, to tell her to come over so we can all feel happy. I reminded her that Grandma lives in heaven, and it's a little too far for her to get here. So she thought for a bit and said, I know. We can wave to her cloud and tell her we love her. So just before Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter and I stood at the window and did just that. And again, you won't read about anything like that in the headlines. All of this is somewhat new to me, sharing the details of what my life is really like. And I don't do it to make you sad. I don't do it for sympathy. I do it in hopes that you'll fight with me, that you'll fight for change. Because when we're raising our children to wave to relatives they never get to meet, or we send them to school in fear, and we pray that they'll make it home, there's something so drastically and undeniably wrong. Tonight, let's honor those we've lost, but tomorrow, let's do better. Let's fight for change and show them all that we can do better. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Song. I saw a woman last year. Her eyes had a sparkle, her posture was relaxed, her movements were deliberate and full of energy. She smiled and laughed and loved to tell anyone who would listen, seize the day. She lived her life that way. She begged for a 3rd child. Her husband did not understand at first that she was not done bringing life into this world. Her 3rd child was born on a beautiful winter day. Her family was complete. She felt at peace. She used to tell people her heart grew 3 times that day, 3 sizes that day. The pleasures in her life were her family. Her greatest joys were her children. She used to sit back and just watch them and smile to herself. Ah, life was good. Her heart was full of gratitude because she knew she was blessed. She was a confident mother. She took her job as a mother seriously and worked hard on making sure her 3 children felt loved and cherished. Her most treasured moments were when her family was all together. At dinner time, vacation, or trapped in the car together. She loved the noise, but she also loved when the house was quiet at night and her children were all tucked into bed. They were safe. She did her job. Her children grew into teenagers and she fell more in love with them, even when she received phone calls like, Mom, I'm okay, but I totaled the car. Or, Mom, don't freak out, I broke my nose in 3 places. Or when the school called and asked if her 3rd child was ever going to hand in a piece of homework. She knew these were trials in their lives, but they were surmountable and good learning lessons for her children. They were becoming offshoots of her, and she marveled at their personalities, their dreams, kindness, and yes, grumpiness. She told them over and over again, there is nothing this family can't get through together. I saw a woman on January 31st, 2018. It was such a beautiful day, and she and her son had such a relaxing and fun morning together. Her son had just gotten his braces off, and he was so happy. She took a picture of him in the car and sent it to his dad. They went to breakfast to celebrate. They had such a great conversation, and he was so upbeat. Her beautiful boy told her about his dreams, his hopes, his plans for the future. He wanted to go to Rice University, go into the military, marry and have 7 children. He wanted his house to be filled with music and laughter. He said, like his home now. The boy asked if he could go to his friend's house. He walked out of the home and out of his family's lives. The woman saw 2 police officers walking across her lawn. Her heart sank. The officers came into the house, and the second officer could not look at the woman. That made her worry. He told her that her beautiful boy was in an ambulance headed to Yale New Haven Children's Hospital, and she needed to get there quickly. She was so confused. She called her husband. On the way to picking up her husband, she called her son's friend and left a panicked message. "I know my beautiful boy was just with you. What is happening?" She was in a slow panic. In the car, they talked about being able to handle anything: blindness, loss of limb, paraplegic, having to care for their son the rest of his life. They were a team and could handle anything. They called the ER doctor from the car and asked what the status of their son was. The ER doctor wouldn't tell them. When she got to the hospital, they walked in, and it was like the parting of the Red Sea. They all knew. They were surrounded by a bunch of people they didn't know and escorted into a tiny room. The ER doctor came in, and in his smallest voice said, "I'm sorry, your beautiful boy is gone." She crawled into a fetal position on the floor and prayed to God that the floor would open and swallow her. The staff asked who they could call. Her husband called their other son and daughter. The sounds that came out of their mouths were raw, guttural sobs, a sound she will never forget. She wasn't brave enough to make those phone calls. How could she say it out loud? The woman needed to see her beautiful boy, to let him know that he is loved and cherished, to kiss his forehead, to tuck him in one last time, to whisper that he's in peace now. She was not allowed to say goodbye. Her son was unrecognizable. They would not let her. While the family was walking out of the hospital, her beautiful boy was being wheeled to the morgue. I see a woman, her eyes are dull, her posture slumped, her movements is as if by rope. She is in a stupor, getting through the days but numb heart, mind, and body. Her smile has turned to tears, her energy's gone. She wonders how she will get through another day. The physical pain is so intense, it's hard for her to breathe. The things that used to bring her pleasure and great joy are chased away to the furthest parts of her mind. They are terrifying reminders of what used to be. She no longer thinks about vacations, summer evenings under the stars, or Christmas mornings. All these pleasures have been sacrificed just to survive. Life is a roller coaster of emotions, ranging from panic attacks, anxiety over what will happen to her other children, and disbelief that her life is now shattered into a million pieces. She doesn't sleep much, and when she does, he visits her at night, calling to her. She frantically runs around like a caged animal trying to get to her beautiful boy. But he slips from her fingers and slowly fades away. A noise wakes her up, and she realizes she's sobbing and wailing, "Why, God, why tell me, my beautiful boy?" She would have happily traded places with him in an instant. She's caught between 2 worlds, the one her beautiful boy is in, and the one her living family's in. She stretches her arms, but can't hold all her children at once. She gets up dreading another day without her son. She has failed as a mother. She sits with her coffee in the kitchen, and she contemplates suicide. Oh, that sounds lovely, no more pain. Her other son grabs her hand and says, "I would not survive if I lost another member of this family." How did he know? Was it that obvious? She now knows she has no other choice but to live. The woman that was once vibrant, happy, optimistic, warm, and loving finds it necessary to withdraw into herself to protect her emotional stability. She isolates herself. It has affected more than just her. It has affected her prized possessions, her husband, and her children. Not only is she dealing with her own heartache, she's also trying to help them deal with their heartache. That woman is me. I am the face of the aftermath of gun violence. My son Ethan, who had just turned 15 years old, was shot and killed with an unsecured gun. Ethan's friend's father, Dan Merkel, left his 3 guns, ammunition, and keys to the trigger locks in the same Tupperware container, basically turning it into a treasure chest for teenage boys. On January 31st, 2018, my beautiful boy Ethan walked out of our home and out of our lives. My last words to him were, "I love you." I heard the front door open, him laughing with his friend, and then it was quiet. At his friend's house, Ethan picked up one of the unsecured guns, did not realize it was loaded, and was shot in the head. he had no chance of survival. The other members of my family are my husband Mike and our children Emily and Evan. Ethan's death has brought me to my knees. It has shaken me and it has broken me. But to quote Psalm 40, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth. There is hope. I am a warrior. Take my hand and rise up unafraid. Take my hand and we will fight harder. We will not retreat. There is a lot of work to be done, and when you are weary, think of me, think of Ethan, and keep fighting the good fight. There is nothing together we can't overcome. I wanted to end with the words my pastor said at the end of Ethan's memorial service. Life is a gift, and we haven't much time to gladden the hearts of those who make the journey with us. So be quick to love, and be quicker still to be kind, so that the gift of your life may be a gift and blessing to others. Thank you. Survivors, we hear you. We hear your important stories, and we love you, and we stand with you. Look at all these people in our community who are here to act and fight and change this outrageous and unacceptable situation. Thank you for sharing your stories. And how are we going to do it? Women vote. That's one way to do it. And this November, we did more than vote, as Abby and Kara described. Our volunteers, women and men, got out and elected a number of candidates that we have here today with us. I'm Rachel Dreyfus. I am the Fairfield Local Group Lead for Moms in Action, and Amy Common is my co-lead. And tonight, we'd like to thank our current and incoming elected officials who are here to show solidarity with us in this community. And with the power they have of their offices, they're going to do the hard work of keeping our strong gun laws in Connecticut and getting some new ones passed. So Amy's going to read all the names of the current and new incoming elected officials. And when Amy reads your name, please stand up. I have Allie Brennan. State Representative Laura Devlin. Senator Bob Duff. Representative Krista McCarthy-Vahey. Governor-elect Ned Lamont. And Senator Richard Blumenthal. If any current or incoming elected official is here today that we have not read your name and you would like to be recognized, please stand up and say your name now.
I'm Ian Hospital, representing the 26th District in the state.
Lucy Dagan, representing the 142nd, which covers North New Canaan.
I'm Matt Blumenthal, State Representative-elect, representing the 147th District in Stamford and Darien.
Anybody else? Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. We hope everyone will join us. We're having a reception after the program concludes to mingle with the elected officials and get to know them. And I'm just so touched to see everyone show up here today. And now I'd like to invite Senator Richard Blumenthal, a longtime advocate for gun sense, to say a few words right now.
Thank you all for coming out on a Sunday night. Thank you to the Congregational Church, Pastor Whitmore, and the congregation for having us tonight. And most important, thank you to the survivors and families of victims for sharing your stories. In the end, there really are no words to make sense of gun violence. I have been working on this issue not only in the 8 years that I have been a United States Senator, but for decades before when I was Attorney General of the state of Connecticut. I like to tell people that I have been getting F ratings from the NRA for longer than some people. And these years is really the courage and strength of the families. You've seen it tonight. I remember that day in Sandy Hook and the courage and strength I saw there. The faces torn by grief and pain. I remember them as a parent, as well as a public official. And I remember the Christmas decoration at the church that evening, St. Rose of Lima, where we gathered. The church was filled, and people outside heard the service that was broadcast. And I remember approaching one of the moms who had lost her 6-year-old child that day. And I said to her, when you're ready, we should have a conversation about gun violence. And she said, I'm ready now. And she was ready, and she has fought as Moms Demand Action have fought, as other survivors and families have fought. And have no doubt, you are making a difference. You put gun violence on the ballot this November, and you won. You won not only here in Connecticut with the state representatives and state senators and governor-elect who, by the way, made gun violence an issue in this election. Thank you, Ned Lamont. But we won across the country. Across the country, men and women were elected to the United States Congress who put gun violence on the ballot. They made it an issue in their election in a way that never has happened before. Never in this country. That's because of you. That's because you were out there knocking on doors and making phone calls and putting candidates on the spot. We are in the midst of a social change movement. And like every social change movement, it has steps forward and steps back, and it is powered by the energy and passion of ordinary people who want to make a difference. So I'm here to say thank you to you, as well as the survivors and families. And also to say that we have a lot of work to do. We are honoring those families, and we are commemorating and remembering the victims of that December 14th horrific tragedy, as well as remembering Orlando and Sutherland Springs, Charleston, all of the mass murders, but also the 90 every day, 90 deaths every day, in homes, in robberies, 1 or 2, and they don't make headlines. But we can do something. We can make background checks mandatory for every firearm purchase, universal background checks. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. We can ban bump stocks and 3D weapons. And we must improve gun storage laws in this country. And I want to thank Kristen and Mike Song for better gun storage laws, and I can pledge to you that I will make it one of my priorities as well. Thank you to Mike and to Kristen for your championing that law. And we can adopt a red flag statute, known also as an extreme risk protection statute, that says to people who are dangerous to themselves or others, you shouldn't possess or purchase a firearm. And if a court orders that you surrender it, it should be taken away. And that's one of the lessons of Parkland. And finally, let me just say, this should not be about politics. It should not be about Republican or Democrat. It should be bipartisan. That gun red flag statute that I sponsored in the United States Congress, I co-sponsored with Lindsey Graham. That's the kind of bipartisanship we should mobilize in this next Congress. And it will happen. It will happen just as it did in Connecticut. It will happen in the United States Congress because of you. Because you are helping to lead this effort, and you are demanding action. Moms demand action. So let me just say finally, we are breaking the grip of the NRA. Not to say it will happen all at once, but we are breaking that grip because of this social change movement, because of you, because you have the passion and faith to keep going and keep working and making sure that Americans get what they deserve, which is better laws, better enforcement, better public officials who will keep faith with you. Thank you so much.
And now I have the pleasure of introducing another F-rated NRA legislator, our new governor-elect, Ned Lamont.
I'm just struck listening to your stories from the survivors here in what is a season of great hope. This is what the season is. And hearing you say that, you know, you have to see the TV trucks go by as you're trying to celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah, and the irony. But it is so hopeful that you're so actively involved in making a difference every day, that we know that we're not going to let this happen again, and we're going to do everything in the core of our being to make sure it doesn't happen. I was, one of the most amazing things I did in the last year was, I was there in Newtown and saw the kids from Parkland came up. And there they were, you know, together, Sandy Hook and Parkland, the kids, and they cried, they hugged, they looked each other in the eye, and then they stood up with resolve that they were going to make a difference every day. And I love the moms demand action, and I love the students demand action, because you remind us every day that we cannot take our eye off of what we have to do. There's somebody that dies every other day in Connecticut from gun violence. And we can stop that. We can stop that. We can stop that as Dick Blumenthal and Chris Murphy and our delegation have been just incredibly strong in Washington, D.C., and making sure that Connecticut stays a leader when it comes to gun safety laws, and I promise you Connecticut will stay a leader when it comes to gun safety laws. And you just heard Dick describe what we should be doing. Yeah, I was struck that I hear about gun show loopholes, and then I realized that there's an internet loophole that is bigger than this church. You know, you can go to Ghost Guns and just order this stuff online. The internet end around is just extraordinary. And the 3D printing and the danger that that represents. So I promise you, we're going to do everything we can at the federal and state level. But I also heard Paul talk at the very beginning of the service. And it just reminded me that I'm doing everything I can to make sure we're a state that looks out for each other and loves each other. And that's the other piece of what we have to do. And I was just horrified reading the Hartford Current this morning, the Lanza notes of this. Boy, he was just so isolated and so angry and so paranoid. And people knew it. People knew it. People knew it. And they didn't do anything. And so I went around the state of Connecticut, which I did a lot this last year. You know, you go to that block in Bridgeport, where there'd been just violence after violence. And you talk to the ministers, and you talk to the counselors, and they say, when they cut off the after-school activities, we saw the violence pick up. And it just reminds you that there are little things that we can do looking out for each other, and the little things that I can do as a governor and didn't do as a senator that do make a difference and make sure we don't have more people sitting over there going forward. And as Dick said, you know, this never used to be such a partisan and political issue. We lost last week Connecticut's president, George Herbert Walker Bush. And he was raised here, okay, went out to Texas, he became a hunter. He was a lifelong member of the NRA until about a generation ago when he stood up to the NRA that belittled and spoke down after another tragedy that happened in the mid-90s. And George Bush said famously to the NRA, "I am offended by your lack of decency and honor, and I resign my lifetime membership to the NRA." And we need more people of honor and decency who stand up every day and fight to make a little difference, one-on-one, person-to-person, listen to these stories and make sure that they do not fall on deaf ears. And I thank you so much for spending the time to hear this and be reminded, and I hope you live the lessons every day. Thank you.
While they are singing, we will be doing candle lighting, and hopefully you all do have a candle. We'll have volunteers coming down the aisles to light the candle on the end, and then if you could pass the flame to your neighbor until all the candles are lit. Thank you.
Amen.
very honored to introduce the next song, the next performer. It was written by my brother, Eric Donnelly, who's a musician in the alternate groups. Unfortunately, he's traveling tonight, but his bandmate, Tim Warren, is here and is going to be singing it. These are Eric's words, the words of a survivor, and it's his story from his viewpoint, but unfortunately, it's the story of so many of us in this country. And you know, I hope you listen to it, and you know, I hope you're motivated to fight when you hear it, because there's so many people. There's 96 people in this country every day are lost to gun violence, and those families are all getting that phone call tomorrow. So this is Tim.
Was a gun in the hands of a sick young man, bright blue eyes. A man who looked just like me, as far as anyone else could see. A stranger, not an enemy, and my mother watched it all. That was the last thing that she saw. Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. Nothing can prepare you for the news it's gonna bring. And nothing ever changes, just the names and the faces. And somewhere in America, the phone is about to ring. An unlucky break, wrong time, wrong place. I've heard them all so many times. If your dad had a gun of his own, maybe they'd still be alive. But I still can't believe the resistance, the denial, and the insistence. When something's broken, it clearly needs fixing, you can fight to change, or you can fight to stay the same. Somewhere in America, the news is about to break. Nothing can prepare you for the toll it's gonna take. And nothing ever changes, just the dates and the locations. And somewhere in America, the news is about to break. And how long is too long before the words you can't The years have been kind, Mom. I got a son now of my own. When I think of what I'll tell him happened to you, I still don't know. That the world's a much safer place. That kind of danger you won't ever have to face. And I pray he lives to see that day. No idea what I'm gonna say. Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. Nothing can prepare you for the news it's gonna bring. And all this time we've been waiting, time spent debating. Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. Somewhere in America.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for singing that song, and for getting that going. Interestingly enough, Kristen and I were talking about that song before we even realized we had such a close connection. And thank you, Charlotte and your friends, for singing so beautifully. But before we thank everyone for coming, we'd like to take a minute to recognize people who have been impacted by gun violence who are in the audience today. And, you know, we are becoming a nation of survivors. It's hard to find someone who doesn't know someone who's been impacted. So in a sense, it's all of you. But if you're willing, please stand. If you were directly impacted by gun violence, if you've brought food and kept families going, if you've texted late into the night, like my friend Heather and Veronica. I mean, like, so many of you, it's like we're a family because of this. So please stand if you've been affected by gun violence in a personal way. And we promise that we will keep going until this insanity stops. We thank you for your bravery and your resolve and your advocacy, and we take your voices and your experiences with us every day. And we also want you to take a beautiful orange rose on your way out in solidarity and remembrance that we will continue fighting gun violence and we will not stop. Thank you.
And again, thank you, Abby, for your beautiful voice in this fight against gun violence. I can't think of a better partner. We literally finish each other's thoughts at this point. I think are telepathically connected. We spend a lot of time together working on this issue, and I know we both feel very strongly, as do the volunteers who are here with us this evening, that we're not going away. We say in Moms Demand Action, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And yes, some days can feel really, really dark, and we can feel like we're not getting anywhere. But as you mentioned, as any good movement occurs, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it makes me feel strengthened to know that there are so many people who are willing to stick with it and to keep going, because it takes all of us. And so thank you all for being here. A very special thank you to the Fairfield local group of Moms Demand Action, which helped provide this beautiful venue. I just can't even believe how beautiful it is. Thank you, Fairfield moms. To all of the moms here in Connecticut who helped pull this off, to all the cookie bakers back here in this room, please don't leave just yet. We have lots of delicious things to eat in this back room here, and we would love for you to join us, even if just for a little while. And most importantly, again, just to thank our survivors and for lending their voices here again. It is so important that your voices be heard. You all are the movement, and we need you to keep going with that. I even know I can't even imagine how difficult it must be. So thank you all for doing that, and also for all the other survivors that are in the audience here, many of whom I know are also very outspoken advocates for gun violence prevention. And then, of course, thank you to our legislators, our current legislators, and our incoming legislators. We're very excited to work with you in 2019 and beyond. We also wanted to thank our musicians, our beautiful violinists, and our performers from Laurelton Hall, and Tim. Also our Gun Violence Prevention Coalition partners. We work very closely with Connecticut Against Gun Violence, and I know that we have some representatives from that group, so we wanted to acknowledge them. It takes all of us. And most importantly, again, just thank you all for coming out tonight, and let's keep going. Together we can do this.
Thank you.